The Providence Journal invited 8 public officials to discuss race in Rhode Island, our series about the state's changing population, the gaps that have developed among the races, and the consequences for all of us. Their comments will help shape public policy and set the climate for how we treat each other. Commissioner, thank you very much for participating.
Thank you for having me.
Just as I mentioned in the introduction, so we published a series of stories, Race in Rhode Island, about the state's changing population, these huge gaps that are developing almost everything, education, healthcare, home ownership, and the consequences for all Rhode Islanders because of that. So at this point of our project, we go to invite 8 state and local policymakers in to have a discussion about what we found so far. So thank you for coming. I'll start with the first question, we'll go around. So let me just ask, what have you learned from the series? Anything surprise you at all?
Yeah, a lot of things have surprised me. You know, the gap between either education, health, and the judiciary. So it was amazing to see when it's put together. You know, we are diverse. In the last 50 years, this state has really seen a demographic change, and you really don't. I don't necessarily deal with those. You know, education regularly, and perhaps healthcare and other segments of services here. But when I read, and it was pretty amazing at the lack of diversity and some disparate treatment that still exists today.
Kid, do you want to start? Do you have a question?
Sure. We were wondering, given the national tensions that have been playing out, how you feel they're playing out on city streets, and how it's affecting your police officers. Are they on edge?
Yeah, so when going back nearly 2 years, when you have use of force, Ferguson was perhaps one of the beginning national dialogues about police use of force, and then we had subsequent uses of force in other parts of the country as well. It hits home because police officers are police officers across the country, and it gives us an opportunity to reflect on what we do here, if it could happen here, and if so, are we prepared? And if we don't think it would, why is that? And perhaps refocus our efforts in trying to build a better relationship with community members. I think that's what's significant. Knowing that it could happen here, and policing is very difficult in this day and age, particularly with technology. We're constantly being filmed. And whenever a police officer uses force, it never looks pretty. And when there are snippets of that force and you don't see the whole picture, then people take a position just on the video. So we're very sensitive to what's going on nationally, and we always try to re-examine what we do here with retraining and educating our police officers, the proper use of force, the protocols, and what we see elsewhere. So not knowing all the stories in other parts of the country, it's pretty shocking what you see on video and sometimes on audio in whether it's New York or Ferguson or Baltimore.
Could I just follow up on that? So if you remember, there was a forum back in April at URI. We said hello. It was called Urban Policing. And it was right after the South Carolina shooting. And there was a lot of questions, Commissioner, about when police interact with the community. And you made the point that, yeah, it's a subjective decision. When you stop, when you don't stop. And then you said at one point, the level of restraint is a challenge when policing urban situations, the level of restraint. And then a couple of the panelists have made the point then, okay, so how do you teach and how do you train police officers at that level? And I think if I'm correct, you made the point, there's a lot of times while we do training, I really don't know what's inside the police officer's head because they've come from suburban areas. I don't know what their background is. I don't know how they've been socialized, because your word.
Sure.
So if I have that correct, that makes me a little uncomfortable. I mean, is there a way to handle that, or how do you deal with that? We don't really know what's going on in the police officer's mind when he does a stop or confrontation.
Yeah, and that's where training is so critical, both in our academy. So we hire throughout the region, not only the state, for police officers, and we all come with biases and some experience, some good, some bad. And so how do you shape, an urban police officer in the sensitivity and the challenges that he or she's going to face? And that's where it comes down to training. The selection process, first of all, and then as much as you can, because this is psychological. And you don't know what's in someone's head as a candidate to become a police officer, and then through the training and then on the street. You don't know what goes through someone's head. So we train, and we train and train and continue to reinforce that training, because we know when you're in situations, whether it's use of force or other situations, that you're always going to revert back to your training, because that's what you'll always remember, that this is the right way of doing it. Now, we're human beings as well, and we make mistakes, and we react, but we're trained to have some resiliency and take, a lot of verbal abuse and sometimes physical abuse more than, and that's our democracy. That's the job that we signed up for. When I said that, that is a challenge, but I'm also confident that we give training here in Providence. We continuously give, updated training, and when we have instances that happen throughout the country, that is urban policing, we remind in roll calls, we remind in memos, and we reflect on our policies to see if they are current. We use a lot of restraint here in Providence. I came from another agency, as you all know, and the 5 years, or nearly 5 years I've been here, I've read every use of force. It's that important to the department. So the Colonel Esserman at the time, and now Colonel Clements, it's been embedded that any use of force, whether it's pepper spray, whether it's they used to call it a nightstick, but an asp is just a striking, or physically having to use force. You have to document that. It's important that we document those things and that we review them as well. I have aggressive police officers. I had aggressive police officers in the state police as well. I had people that think differently. We're human. But the amount of restraint that I've seen here is remarkable, because we deal with a lot of challenging situations, either substance abuse people or mentally ill people that, they don't mean to do any harm, but they could do some harm going at the gun of a police officer. So that's why, years ago we've gone to tasers. Now, people may not like a taser, but I do, because it won't kill you. It'll disarm someone rather than get into a physical altercation when we need to make an arrest or whatever it is we do. But, we're the only entity in this country that can take a life, on the street. No other authorized person can do that. There's a lot of power that comes with that, but there's also a lot of restraint, and we need to continue. That's our last resort. And statistically, we've had a limited amount of shootings, and the shootings that we engage in, the Providence Police, it is as a result of us getting shot at.
Wayne, you want to continue?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, actually. You a couple of times said, quote unquote, it could happen here.
Sure.
Explain what you meant by that and under what circumstances, and I'm sure that you have thought of scenarios where this could happen, and talk to us about that.
Sure. I mean, we're 420 police officers. It's a large department, and there are 420 individuals. We train, they understand, but when I say it can happen here, it can escalate real quick. And if that police officer is in fear of his or her life, if they're outnumbered, if they feel like their life is threatened, then it's going to escalate, and it'll escalate real quick. So when I say it can happen here, whether it's Ferguson or Staten Island or Baltimore, use of force can happen here real quickly. And, to what degree do we have independent evidence? Luckily, in some of those cases, the South Carolina case, it was all on an iPhone or on a video. I mean, that was horrendous. as a professional for nearly 30 years, to see a police officer shoot a person that's going away in the back. Horrible. It saddens me to see that happen. That's criminal, and I'm glad he was indicted and face the consequences. I don't think for a second that a scenario like that would happen here because of the training that we've had. When I say it could happen, we could have an incident where it looks unpleasant when we use force, and there's a lot of cell phones out there. But I'm a big advocate of body cams. I
That
think
was going to be my next question.
Yeah. You know, and the police officers aren't going to like it because nobody wants sort of Big Brother recording and videoing. But I say, look, I want a full recording rather than a snippet of what happens. And you see it in departments that are in jeopardy, you know, out in Oakland, California, and other places that have gone to body cams. We shouldn't wait until an incident happens before we go there. And we've had discussions, and we'll be using some body cams as a demo in a small number of police officers just to get the kinks in the policy up. But you know, I'm hopeful in years to come that police officers will all be equipped with body cams. It'll protect them as much as protect the community.
So what's the obstacle? Why aren't they happening? Who's opposed?
It's like anything else, it's money. You know, it's probably $500,000 for the city of Providence to
Really?
invest in, you know, that kind of equipment going forward. And it's not to solve all, because as we see in, you know, the playoffs in the NFL, you're going to get one perspective from one angle in a body, you know, a cam. But at least you'll have video and you'll have audio of the interaction between police and community.
Zach, you have a question?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that you've mentioned is around training, but there's also an administrative role in the placement of officers that allows them to get in situations of
Sure.
needing force, and that seems like something that can be controlled
Sure.
at the administrative level.
Sure.
So are there discussions at the department about how we can use police presence proactively to need it, you know, less overall than to invest more in situations where we'll have that force? Something disparate, you know, proportions of stops in certain communities, or over-focusing on different racial and ethnic backgrounds.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, we're careful. So we're a unionized shop. So the FOP is our body that they're unionized, and we have a CBA, collective bargaining agreement. So some of this is dictated by contract, but we have some discretion. Look, we know we're small enough where the commanders and the captains know the personnel that they manage, and they try to place people in posts or situations where they best fit. But in some instances, you know, if they bid, we can't block them going to a certain district. SROs, for example, school resource officers, it takes a certain kind of person to be that. Not all police officers can be an SRO. And so we're careful in, you know, screening and assessing the abilities and skills of police officers that want to be SROs. And we do the best we can, and I think they've been pretty successful in those officers that want to deal with, you know, kids under 18 in a way that's positive and not in a way that's policing and, you know, arresting bad behavior. I don't believe that for a second that we should be doing that, only in extreme cases. So the question is, we have some ability to put the right people in the right places. We do, and we're constantly, you know, looking at who should be assigned where, so it's most effective.
Lana, do you have a question?
Yes, Commissioner, I recently had an opportunity to talk to Colonel Mendonça from the City of Central Falls.
Yes.
I went to a celebratory signing that Mayor James Dioza did on some hiring ordinances
Yes.
for police and fire in Central Falls that
Yes.
looked at kind of changing things up, given the change of demographics in that
Yes.
city. It is an urban city, very similar to Providence. Obviously, the size is a lot smaller, and I know in your previous capacity, you also assisted in Central Falls as well. just your reaction to the hiring ordinances, if you know about them. Is it similar to what happens in Providence? Do you think Providence should follow suit? Basically, 70-30 was the split in terms of the exam, 70 being written exam, 30 being an oral exam. It's now being changed to 50-50. Points are being added if you are a veteran. Points are being added if you speak more than one language. And points are being added if you live in the city for more than 2 years. As somebody who spends a lot of time in schools in Central Falls, it heartens me to see this, because I want our youngsters to grow up to want to be police officers, to want to be fire people. And I feel like these ordinances are more equitable given the demographics. But just curious to hear your thoughts about it, reactions. Is it something that we should be doing statewide?
Yeah, the mayor and I talked about that before the ordinance, and we also talked to the colonel there. Now, Providence years ago, prior to me getting here, had an ordinance in place where it gives 10 points for a city resident. They have to live 6 months in the city prior to the application. There is some, and so the last 2 academies for the fire department were under that ordinance, and also the police department academy. Now, as you know, we're going through a recruitment for the police department, and it'll be applicable to them as well. So it's 10 points if you're a city resident. We found that it helped us somewhat, where you get 10 points for the written exam. So our process is you take the agility, the physical agility, and if you pass those 4 standards that are set nationally, then you are invited to take the written exam, and then whatever your score is, and if you're a city resident, you get 10 extra points, which I found very helpful and effective in recruiting people from the city from a diverse background. We do not have any points for bilingual people or veterans as well. I can tell you in the last process of the Providence Police Department, we looked at those skill sets that are bilingual. And when it came down to the very end, after about 225 backgrounds were conducted on these individuals, and we had to select a class of 50, I believe. I think it was 55, we graduated 52 or 3. We looked at that skill set of their ability to speak a second language, and we hired or offered a job to a lot of those folks that had that skill set. We need more people that have that ability in a lot of languages. And so that gave us an opportunity to have a pretty diverse, school last time, and we plan on doing the same thing this time. But we have ways to go. We're 22-23%, I think, with our incumbent police officers that are minority, and we should be much higher. And another continuous mandate from this mayor is to hire a diverse workforce, and this is the first academy, and so far the numbers look good with the diversity in the pool of candidates that we have, but we're still in the agility phase of our process.
Who's next? Katie?
I know that there has been a lot said about officers of color lacking in the leadership ranks and the promotions process. Do you feel, are there ways that you could adjust that to make your leadership look more diverse? I know you're somewhat bound by the union, correct?
Yeah, yes.
But also I understand that Chief Esserman kind of mixed it up and found a way to bring people into the leadership of his own volition. He worked it somehow where he could. Where does that stand in terms of leadership?
You have to take an exam for the rank of sergeant, lieutenant, and captain. And so it's pretty restrictive to the collective bargaining agreement. There's so many points that the chief, up to 5 points that the chief of police can give a candidate. And then depending on at what rank and what percentage in oral interview and then the written exam, all bound by the CBA. Colonel Lesserman struck an agreement with the union, several years ago, predates me, in which he had an opportunity to select a few candidates for varying ranks, and then the union went by seniority and picked. So they diverted from the strict language of the CBA. That's how I think you were referring to
Yeah.
in getting people, beyond the CBA process. So, we've had discussions we've had a change in leadership with the FOP. We've had discussions with that leadership, and with the new leadership, we'll be having discussions about changing the CBA. So it gives us more of an ability to pick skill sets that, do not reflect in the written exam or the oral interview. So African Americans, for example, we don't have any representation below the rank of, above the rank of lieutenant that are African Americans. Now, that just didn't happen overnight. That was years of both hiring and lack of diversity in our ranks. And I'm not blaming the contract exclusively, but it inhibits us in trying to select a diverse command staff. So you're not going to see that change quickly because of those restraints, but I think it should, where you can select not only minorities but women that represent, the police department at the higher ranks.
What is the status of the gun task force?
The
currently?
status?
Yeah, where does that stand?
They're out in the street, they're working. We put some restrictions in reporting into place so that there's documents when there's interaction between the gun task force and pedestrians or motorists. That wasn't in place in the past. So they are deployed and operational, and they do a good job, but they do a tough job too. And as I've instructed, if you can't be violating anyone's rights, and it's a tough job to try to identify who's carrying guns and then do it lawfully, so you're not just searching, everyone that's on the street at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, they're well trained, and they're aggressive, as aggressive as the law will allow them to be, but they take an awful lot of guns off the street every year.
Zach?
I'm glad you mentioned SROs, because I was concerned about the situation in Pawtucket. I'm sure you were too. I know that we signed an MOU recently between Providence Schools and the department, and it seemed like it made the situation better. But on my rereading of that, and I'm not a lawyer,
Sure.
it doesn't seem like it would have helped to mitigate that situation. And I think part of that may be because we don't know all of the details of what happened in Pawtucket and
Sure.
what administrators were involved.
Sure.
But are there ongoing strategies for how to prevent such situations from happening in Providence schools beyond what was solved by the MOU? And then are there discussions about how we can mitigate the use of SROs, period? Because in a lot of schools, I work in schools and I
Sure.
talk with students.
Sure.
It's a mixed bag
Sure.
about their usefulness and helpfulness.
Sure.
There are some who see them as role models, but
Sure.
others who see them as...
Sure. Yeah, and that's where, earlier I talked about selecting the right officer to be an SRO. And so, we see the video in Pawtucket and not knowing all the facts, and I won't opine about good, bad, or indifferent. I can just tell you that use of force always looks ugly. It just does, because it's physical force against an individual for whatever reason. What leads up to and what happens thereafter, that's all open for, review and determination. Look, there's a balance. Years ago, we didn't, as a profession, we didn't push our way into the schools. There was a demand for safety and security in our schools. So there's a lot of strong opinion about, look, should you even be wearing a gun? inside, an educational building. And, there's arguments, valid arguments, both ways, and I can see. But we've been in schools for a number of years, and as you probably know, some teachers love us, and some teachers wish we weren't there. We're not in every school, we don't have the personnel to be at every school. So we select those schools that are having some difficulty, and as I said, we put our officers in those schools that we think we're most effective with the right personality. So there's a relationship. There's a lot of young kids that are developing in that age of 14 to 17, 18. You can influence a lot of minds in a positive way if you're the right personality in the SRO. You can also turn a lot of young minds off by your behavior and attitude if you're not the right person. So we're constantly reviewing, you can't stay there for a long period of time. It's a difficult, position to hold. And, we're constantly reviewing and making sure we have the right people in the right place. And sometimes we wait too long before we take somebody out, or we put somebody in that just doesn't fit in that kind of setting.
Do you have the flexibility to make those decisions?
We do.
Because Pawtucket does not seem to, with the Bill of Rights that they have to deal with there. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, it gets a little complicated, but, the selection for, an SRO, we can't just unilaterally remove someone because we want to, remove them. But if there are some instances where we think it's not the best fit, we got the ability to move them. And they know that going in. So these are officers that love kids and can relate to kids and be mentors. That's the kind of, person that we try to put in those positions. But it's a difficult job too. You're dealing with minds that they're not necessarily friends of police, or they look at us as, somewhat as adversaries of their freedoms and their growth, and we're there for safety. And so it's been effective around the country, but there's always that argument, we shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Anna, do you have anything else?
Recently, Rhode Island's nonviolence community leadership, lost a great advocate in Lieutenant Gross, moving on to the national scene in Chicago. And I know he's not totally gone because he still has his family here and he's coming back and forth. But just your thoughts. It's not one of my prepared questions, but I know you've been very involved with the nonviolence community, and just your thoughts about the future of nonviolence advocates being partners with police and law enforcement, and ensuring that we have a proactive agenda in communities more so than a reactive one.
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter of the street workers and the Institute. Look, as much as we can prevent violence and conflict on the street before police get involved, that's a win all day long. But there's an investment there, investment in resources, investment in money to support them. And so the Institute's been around for a number of years, and we've seen the level of federal and state resources, drop. And so, going from 8 to 10 street workers down to 2 or 3, we feel the effect. They do amazing work to disrupt and prevent violence among, young kids that are feuding over nonsense. We don't have the ability to get in and look at areas where they need assistance, social services, they need job training, they need job opportunity, they need another environment than the neighborhood they're from. So Tenny's done a wonderful job. It's an institution that's been built, I think, and will continue on. They have the Providence Police's full support. We know it works, and we wish we had more resources to bring more street workers in, because we'd rather have them, deconflict than us having to investigate an act of violence. But like anything else, with the economy and the resources, it takes money to run it. But I'd rather pay, the $100,000 that it takes on the front end than, $1 million or $2 million as a result of the shooting that happens, or the homicide that's disruptive to so many lives. It'll go on because I think he's built something, Sister Ann's built something that is sustainable, and we just need to rally and give the support as the transition and the new leadership comes in the Institute. But I'm hopeful that it'll continue because it's a real good tool for the city of Providence.
Commissioner, what do you think of Black Lives Matter?
Black Lives Matter, of course. It's a national discussion now. Black Lives Matter. It's not offensive to me, as other police officers perhaps think that, that word, black or message, is offensive to the profession. No, Black Lives Matter, and I understand the frustration in those people of color that have been, treated. We talked about, this very thing in either education or housing, opportunity, all kinds of social issues that, they're faced with. Look at this country and the population of our prison system. Why is that? It's a bigger discussion, but Black lives does matter, and some will say all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter, but the message is the people from the minority community, particularly young men, think that they don't matter. And that's pretty sad when we have a segment of our society that feels that way about themselves. It does matter. We should, continue to build a better relationship, better connection, better trust. Because if they don't trust, the police, then where do they turn? And it's gotten to the point, that we have to say Black Lives Matter. Well, that's how they feel, and I respect that. All lives matter. Black Lives Matter as well. And we're a part of making them feel like they're a part of, a community and policing. The General Assembly just passed, somebody said the CIPRA or the CCPRA, the racial profiling, if you will, the Comprehensive Community Police Relationship Act. I mean, Providence spearheaded that along with other police chiefs, but there was a small group of police departments and chiefs that sat for months, literally 6 months, with community members. And we were able to come with language that now eventually passed the General Assembly to deal with, driving while black, or you have no reason to stop me but for the skin color. That shouldn't be in anyone's mind or heart, but it is in our minority community. So this is a step that won't eradicate racism or racial profiling, if you will, but it's a step that will continue to collect data so we know what our police officers are doing and to what groups and what happens, post car stop or interaction with a pedestrian. Because we don't know right now. We get complaints, we encourage complaints. If people feel as though they were discriminated or mistreated because of the color of their skin or their gender, that's not why I took the oath of office. That's not why police officers across this country put our right hand and swore to the Constitution. So we want to eradicate that behavior. And that exists in some departments, but it's not as easy as just pointing to a handful of police officers that may be acting this way. This gives us that opportunity to better understand and manage what police officers do in car stops, at least.
So just to follow up on that, in
Yes.
the story today, the names of the officers making the stops are not going to be made public.
Correct.
Who does have that information? What's the follow? What are you going to do with that information?
So the police administrators, so in the Providence Police, will have that information. So we know what officer is making what stops and what the demographics of those stops are and what the activity post-stop may be. Is it searched? Are they contraband? Was there an arrest? All those things this will give us. It goes beyond that as well. It prohibits, police officers for asking a juvenile to consent to a search. So that means, prior to this law being passed, a police officer in uniform can go up to a 17, 16, 15-year-old and have no reason to believe there's contraband or anything illegal going on, and can ask, do you mind if I search your backpack or your person? What is a 15-year-old going to do? Say no to a uniformed police officer? I mean, that's intimidation right, from the beginning. And so we've argued, look, it's not best practice. If we have the legal right to search anyone, then we'll execute our duties and search, having probable cause or reasonable suspicion. We shouldn't be asking juveniles if they'll agree for us to search, and this prohibits it. It's a huge change, for this state and across this country. We just don't think we should be doing that with young kids.
But it's still not clear to me, what's the structure, either in the law or implicit, to look at the data and find patterns of behavior you're not happy with? What's the structure that deals with that?
So the structure is, this data will become public. Brown University will analyze this data and produce, quarterly reports, but every month the raw data of what we're collecting will be published on websites. So it gives us and the community, an opportunity to look at data. So you can drill down and look at data and say, look, your police officers on, I'll use Providence for example, on the south end is stopping 100% minority or 100% women or 100% whatever group. And it gives you valuable information for you to drill down and then start asking the difficult questions. Why are you stopping people and searching every single one and not coming up with any contraband? So something's wrong. Something's wrong there. So it's a training issue, or it's a pattern with a police officer or a group of police officers that we have to retrain. And I use that just as one example. This is going to get us a step closer to eradicate bad behavior if it's existing, within the department. Why are we searching? The last study showed we as police officers in the state are searching minorities 2 times the rate as Caucasians. But we're finding less contraband on minorities than Caucasians. Why is that? I wish I had the answer to that. It's training, it's education, and it's holding police officers accountable.
Do you think the very fact of the law will be instrumental in changing behaviors preemptively, as it were, knowing that this data is going to be collected? Do you think some individuals will be more thoughtful?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Any police officer, whether it's Wesley, Woonsocket, the state, or Providence, if you have a racist police officer stopping 100% minority and searching every single one of them, by all means, that police officer will now know that that activity is being captured, is going to be reviewed. If they continue like that, then we'll identify that person and we'll eradicate them from the profession. We don't want people behaving in that manner. So absolutely it's going to change behavior with police officers in interaction, without a doubt. And just by the mere fact that administrators are going to be overseeing and analyzing their activity, and the community will be doing that as well.
Is that any follow-up on that?
Yeah, the community will have the aggregated data.
Yep.
But part of the proposed Community Safety Act regulation says it were, for lack of a better word, would in effect make these interactions between citizens and police kind of a case management system, where they get a receipt of the interaction with the reason why they were stopped,
Right.
and then a phone number or a business card of the folks, the
Right.
officer that stopped them.
Right.
If that information is already being collected for the department, why can that also not be simply collected for or given to the people who were stopped? Like, it seems like the administration's argument has been that's an administrative burden, but it also seems like it's already occurring. So I would love to see us be a national leader on that and say this is, a best practice, and Providence is going to be the first in the country, say, to give these stop receipts.
Sure. So when I say administrative burden, we don't have the ability to print out, a receipt of this interaction. You would increase that traffic stop by several minutes by just going through, printing out a receipt and all those kinds of things. That's what I meant when I've either opined about the Safety Act, that we don't have the mechanism. We've, years ago when, I was at the state police, we used to do traffic stop cards. And so we didn't have computers and couldn't electronically capture that data. It was an enormous work to, make sure and account for all the traffic stops in these computer cards. Technology where we are, we're collecting data now, and we're collecting it, and all departments in the state have been collecting it for several months, some continuously. And it's all done electronically, so it's a drop down. You check the boxes. It gives us data for every car stop. Now, it's an honor system as well. If a police officer doesn't fill it out, we've had those, eventually it catches up to that person. You hold them accountable for not, or her accountable for not filling out the traffic stop data. By requiring a receipt and an interaction with the officer's name and a contact and all those things, it'll be a nightmare to implement. And it's virtually impossible because all those cars don't have printers in the mechanism to produce that kind of
Would
thing.
that be less expensive than body cams?
I don't know.
The cases of use of force
Yes.
are more rare, and they're more violent and,
Yep.
and
Yep.
showy, but I think it's the droning kind of examples
Right.
of stopping and driving while black. which you
Right.
mentioned that
But let me
really
s-
weigh more on folks.
Yeah, so let me say this. The interaction, every interaction between a police officer and a car stop and a motorist, if that's videoed and audio recorded, it stops that kind of behavior. If you got an aggressive police officer or a rude police officer or whatever, I understand, those are the extreme cases where you have use of force and deadly force, you want it on video. I wanted everything on video because I know it'll curb the behavior of police officers across this state that may be a little bit aggressive, maybe outside the lines of either probable cause or searches. They'll curb all that. And so even the disrespect that I'm sure happens quite frequently in those car stops, if I'm a police officer wearing a body cam, I'm going to be respectful and I'm going to be professional. So it's going to change the behavior. A lot of them are wonderful, communicators when they interact. I'm talking about a small segment, but that hurts our reputation when we have that interaction and it's not a professional interaction. So the body cams, as I said, look, it's not going to end racism, it's not going to end racial profiling, body cam or the CCPRA, but it's just another tool. We have, as you've seen across the country, everyone's out there. When we have a car accident, a crash on Broad Street, you'll have people on iPhones just filming it, just in case something goes bad, and they'll have something and they can put it on YouTube, I guess, I don't know. But so everyone's filming it, but we're not filming our own folks, so we have a complete record of that interaction. That's why I support body cams for those reasons. As far as the slips, I don't know what the cost across the state to do the printing, but that's only going to give you, okay, you were stopped at such and such a time by such and such a person. I can tell you without a slip, when you come in and say, I was stopped at such and such a time by such a, there'll be a recording, electronic recording of that data of your car stop. Now, if the police officer chooses, I'm just not going to fill it in, that's fine. Then we go back at the police officer and find out why he or she didn't fill in that data. I want to get away from paper. I want to get away from the burden of those processes and use technology. So we're collecting a record, but we're also not burdening the police officer that stops thousands and thousands of cars, a weekend.
You've talked more than once in this conversation about improving relations
Sure.
with the community. Have you given any thought to, for lack of a better word, more innovative ways to do it? And just thinking out loud here, for example, bringing community members and community leaders in to meet with police officers in a forum, a big room, a big hall, doing that on a regular basis, so we get FaceTime, so we can actually have a discussion like what we're having here, except open it up to citizens and leaders. Do you think something like that would be effective?
It would. It has to be really well done. I've been to many meetings, community meetings, crime watch meetings, and we've gone, that's our job, we go and listen to the community, and sometimes they're irate because of either crime, because of the lack of response by the police department. That's all fair and fine. If we can get into a constructive discussion, and we did that back in May. We had a forum with faith-based leaders in South Providence, and it was a select group of pastors and reverends from the faith base. It was their initiative. They invited us to come, and we brought 8 or 10 police officers, and we broke them out into groups, and we had a dialogue that was real effective. And a lot of our gun task force folks participated in that. What will derail any constructive relationship is when either, in all due respect, the media and people that want to grandstand and shout and yell at the police for things that may have happened or did happen, and then it's a lot of energy wasted and a lot of frustration vented towards the police. So, you know, we're looking, I just came from a meeting today at the Temple. There's another forum that we're participating in, and in the beginning of December, closed to the public, but having leaders from our community come in and have those discussions with our police officers, with our police administrators, to start building that trust and that dialogue.
Along those lines, I've been to a couple of them, and there's a lot of upset about the gun task force.
Yes.
A lot of people feel targeted, or I don't know about a lot, but
Yes.
people do feel targeted by
Yes.
them. Young people feel targeted by
Yes.
them. And you spoke earlier about picking the right people for the right job.
Yes.
And I hear the blowback about the gun task force. Are you comfortable with the way it's performing?
I am concerned when I hear examples of people's rights being violated. I encourage people to come forward if they feel as though they've been violated. I hear a lot of that chatter on the street as well. I can tell you they're probably the most scrutinized group of we don't have any women, so of men in that gun task force. The sergeant and the 5 or 6 police officers are handpicked for that assignment. And so, yeah, they do work that's difficult. They do amazing work taking guns off the street, but they can't be violating people's rights. And so it's closely monitored. As I said, I do get concerned when there are stories, and I encourage people to come and formally tell us. So that's when I said, do we have a forum with the community? Yeah, if it's constructive. If it's frustration and anger about, look, I'm tired of jump out boys, I'm tired of being, well, give me examples why you believe your friend or you were violated. You know, I'll look into every single one of them, and they'll get a fair and impartial review. But I can tell you, they take a lot of guns off the street over the year. They're focused on kids that are shooting in our neighborhoods. As I said, they can't be violating young people's rights just for the sake of getting a lot of guns off the street.
Along those lines, I spoke with a prosecutor, and he's afraid that the law that doesn't let you ask teens for consent is going to hinder some of that work.
I respect their position, but we also did an analysis of how many, now think about this, how many cases we made, the Providence Police, based on a consent to search. So in most cases, and there was only a handful that we found, in most cases, we had the legal right and authority to search that juvenile. Fine, I got no problem when we have that legal right. In those cases in which we ask for a search and one is given, we have a high bar to overcome with a challenge that that young person wasn't intimidated or coerced in giving consent to search. That's our burden, and that's a pretty high bar, because you're talking about a juvenile in the eyes of the law, and you're talking about them voluntarily giving consent for a police officer to search. There aren't many cases. I understand their concern, but from the communities and from, you know, the practical side, there aren't many cases. And if we don't have a legal right, we shouldn't be asking a juvenile to consent to a search in hopes we find some contraband.
We have time for one or two more. Anybody has anything left?
I have one more.
Go ahead.
I've seen on Facebook this push for an African-American major.
Yes.
And I wonder what, I know there's a rally, I think it's November 2nd, and what is your response to that?
But we shouldn't be promoting someone based on their race. There's a process, and I know legally and technically we can appoint, you know, a major or a commander, number 2 person, or a police chief. But to take a person, now they want an African American, so that means an African American sergeant or detective or a patrol officer, and then put them in the command level for the sake of their race, I think it's counterproductive to what we're trying to do. So we're promoting someone just based on their race, and that just shouldn't be. There's a process. They have to compete like anyone else. The problem is we don't have, you know, an African American command staff person. We need to get there. We need to open the opportunities so there's a selection process in a promotion where, like, we're 23 or 4% minority in the city of Providence. Well, that needs to improve, and so you need to hire a more diverse, you know, academy. Then they, in the future, will have an opportunity to take the sergeant's test and pass and become a sergeant and a lieutenant, and the process is what it is. So I don't believe in just for the sake of their race, putting them into it. I understand the effect, and it should reflect the community. It should reflect when you see an all-white, you know, command staff. We have 1 or 2 Latinos, but no African American in the command staff. That's a problem. That's a problem that's happened years ago, and we're trying to fix it for the future.
Just to finish up, Commissioner, besides the urban policing issue, what do you think the role is of the Commissioner to improve race relations in the city and the state? Besides the policing issue, what's the position, what should you be doing?
What should the Commissioner of Public Safety?
How outspoken should you be about all issues, besides just the urban policing issue? You have a position of authority, you're well respected, what should you be doing?
You know, the hiring of both police and fire. You know, we didn't talk about women. We have a hard time attracting women to the fire department. I know it's a difficult job. Policing as well, we're only 8%, I think 9% women in the Providence Police. We should be much higher. And so those issues of creating a diverse workforce, I think is a role of the Commissioner overseeing, you know, both entities. The relationship is top priority. That's how we're going to avoid, you know, issues in our community if we have a strong relationship. Look, we have some aggressive police officers. We have police officers that may not do the right thing all the time. And if the community feels the whole department, along with the Commissioner, has that attitude, then that's when you see riots. That's when you see real violence, because the community is frustrated. They feel as though they have no chance. They're not treated equally. Relationship really matters in a lot of different ways with the community, both in the police and in the fire. So the Commissioner, I believe, should be focused on continuously building that relationship with the community. And again, think of a whole host of other things that, you know, the Commissioner's office has the ability and the leverage to improve in a whole lot of areas that, you know, I know there wasn't a Commissioner for 8 years prior to me being appointed by the mayor. I see a lot of value, and I'm hopeful that, you know, going forward, I can make those changes in various policies, so we're a better police department and a fire department, you know, in the long run. And it just takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to build that.
Thank you very much, very good conversation.
Thank you for
Come back
having me.
again
Thank you
soon.
very much.
Very
Good conversation, absolutely.